Any questions or comments? Nothing? Everything going well?
I have a question, like a general logic question. You said about the realms.
About
the realms.
Realms.
Yeah. And so we talked about the animal realms and how they will go up. It was like by ending their life, and then they will have less bad imprints, and then the good imprints will take effect.
And also they can do some little good things
so
as well.
Generally, and I'm vegan, but generally if we will kill animals, isn't it going to help them get enlightenment?
No. I mean, all that will happen is that you will create a negative imprint. It's not going to help them. No, it won't. Because you have cut short their life, which means they may still have some residual stuff left over. So it's not going to help. It's not going to help them. Actually, on that point, with often we talk about not harming, and then often the question comes up, do you have to be a vegetarian to be a Buddhist? And the answer is no. But what we need to understand from this not harming or not killing is that there are many levels to try and follow that. At a very sort of heavy level, you killing humans, of course, put in jail for that. But then sort of another level, you can say killing animals, and then another level, more subtle than that, would be not harming animals. So not killing animals like you would vegetarian, not harming animals, you would sort of become vegan. But then, of course, even as a vegan, it's probably better to be organic vegan, because otherwise you're buying products that there are a lot of things being killed with pesticides. So maybe organic vegan's better. But even organic vegan, if you're eating like things dug out of the ground or grain that's harvested, a lot of animals are being killed. So maybe you better become like a fruitarian and only eat fruit dropping from trees, but even they drop on the ground and may kill bugs. So maybe we better not eat at all. And actually, even if we walk outside the house, we may accidentally step on a bug, so maybe we better stay inside the house. But even if we stay inside the house, we may accidentally swallow some bug, so we better put a mask over our face. So what we can see from this is that to live in this world, it's impossible to have no harm. The intention, yes, but the reality is that there's harm. So what we are to do, understand from this advice about not harming, is to, of course, have the intention not to harm, but then to try to reduce the negative impact as best we can in a practical sense. For example, in ancient Tibet, basically if you didn't eat meat, you died, because there was nothing else to eat. But now, of course, a lot of Tibetans in India don't need to eat meat. And so Dalai Lama is very much encouraging them to become vegetarian. And so I think what the sort of the message from not harming is that we, from our own side, as best we can, in whatever practical way we can manage, is try to reduce negative impact on the planet. And then in addition to that, what we don't want to do is take the moral high ground and condemn people who are not operating at our level, because that's cognitive fusion. Rather, we try to encourage others also to reduce their negative impact. So I think this is sort of the message we take from non-harm.
In continuation to that, I also had a question about the animal realm. So it seems to me like the two upper realms and the two lower realms, they're kind of like the same. The demigods and gods, they have the same conditions and also...
Well, similar.
Similar conditions, right? I mean, it's not like... Because here in the human realm, we are born in different conditions. We are born, some of us will be born to a poor family, some to a rich family. In Israel and India, different conditions. And it seems like it's the same also with animals, because animals are also being born into different conditions, and also different animals has different cognitive levels.
Sure.
So does it mean that a dolphin, for example, has a better karma than a goldfish?
Better karma. Better karma. You mean...
Like, more points? I don't know. because he has a better cognitive level than a goldfish, and then he has like more opportunities to do something good.
Right, but cognitive ability, as we know as humans, is a two-edged sword. We can do a lot of good, but we can do a lot of bad as well. So increased cognitive ability doesn't mean necessarily better karma. It could mean worse karma, because you do wreak a lot of destruction with more cognitive ability. So cognitive ability itself is sort of not good or bad in that sense. It's what we do with it which determines whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. So if we're creating a lot of harm, it's actually better to have lower cognitive ability, no? Because we do less harm and less damage.
So it doesn't mean that.
What's that? No.
So
No, I don't think so. And, yeah, there's a lot more to be said, but we'll keep it simple.
And for example, so two cows, right? There's a cow that was born in India and a cow that was born in Israel, you know, and those are completely different conditions, because this cow has a male and
Sure. So there, what we can understand then, there is many different factors and many different experiences in each one of those realms, as in the human realm, animal realm, and all of those realms there's a lot of variation. So these realms are just sort of like, they're just sort of one sort of meaningful way of looking at different types of existences. So they're not, you know, we shouldn't look at them as completely separate things. I mean, they're just like, we have all this existence, and what's a meaningful way to look at all of these existences is to maybe group them into these 5 or 6 groups. That's a meaningful way to look at that. Like we do with everything in our life, we try to make sense or meaning, and we make concepts and categories to make sense of things. So that's just another example.
This is kind of a personal question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe in karma and reincarnation and the existence of the 6 realms? And if so, how did you come to believe in it?
Yeah. Have I seen other beings? No. For me, these sorts of things, based on my studies in all the different things of Buddhism, particularly what's been very helpful is the view of emptiness. I think without the view of emptiness, then a lot of these ideas like karma and rebirth really don't make sense. I mean, for example, if we have a worldview that the mind is the brain, then of course karma and rebirth are just complete nonsense, you know? It's complete nonsense. So, but if we can understand what the mind is, and not just intellectually but experientially through Shamatha Vipassana practice, if we can really see the mind very clearly, plus we study this idea of nature, reality, the emptiness, which we're going to briefly touch on in day 9, if we study that and then meditate on that and start to taste that a little bit, I think based on these two things, then the idea of continuity of mind makes a lot of sense, not just intellectually but experientially. And then of course, then that implies some sort of continuity, implies some sort of future and past lives. And then also, so I'm going to add something to that. Oh yeah, and also we can see the law of causality operating in the physical world, and it's proven in science that there is a law of causality operating in the physical world. And then if we can understand really, like I said, the mind and this idea of emptiness, and we can see that our mind is really creating our world of experience, then we can start to see also this law of causality in terms of our experiences. So, therefore, what I would recommend, and the Buddha himself said, is please don't accept anything I tell you merely out of devotion to me. You need to be like a goldsmith who checks and tests the quality of the gold before accepting it. So I think we are to check and test. And some things like past and future lives, not so easy to test, and maybe karma as well. But I think a lot of these things we can test and check and validate through reasoning, logic and experience. And certainly if we really get into understanding and experiencing the mind and this Vipassana practice of emptiness, then for me this idea of karma and rebirth really sort of fits very well with that, through reasoning and logic, but also through experience. And so therefore, what I generally recommend to people, and if you go to the Tibetans and ask them, what do you think about karma and rebirth? They say, yeah, I believe in it. And you ask them why. They say, because my mum told me. Is that useful? Well, maybe if it stops you from harming others, that's good. But for me, these sorts of concepts, if you find it difficult to understand them or accept them, and they don't seem to be important or relevant, leave them aside. Put them aside. If we reject them, if we start rejecting things just because we don't intellectually accept or understand, I think that might cut us short, because maybe later some of these things become useful and we've already rejected it. So rather, I just put them aside and focus on the things that are useful for you now, and then through developing these things, again, things like coming to see the mind and see the nature of the mind and so forth, through those experiences which are going to benefit, you may find later that some of these other things that you didn't understand or didn't believe or whatever, now are very relevant and you can appreciate them. So that's sort of the advice that I tend to give.
So sometimes, particularly in the West, there's a sense of the spiritual journey among Westerners feeling a bit like a Hunger Games realm. That there's something there's a lot of seeking happening. Seeking, yeah. And
I'm a seeker. Yeah. That's right. I hear that term a lot. I'm a seeker.
How do we know that we're not just trading one version of a pleasure treadmill for another treadmill?
And there is a lot of that spiritual materialism in the world today. A lot. And so what we need to do, of course, is...
Can you repeat the question?
Okay. The question, I think, is that, there's a lot of spiritual traditions in the world today, but isn't there a danger of just making your spiritual tradition another form of chasing after something with craving and attachment? Is that sort of the question? Yeah. And the answer is yes, that happens a lot. Because, and we sort of become a spiritual ego, and I mean that's one of the worst, because the spiritual ego has sort of this air of superiority. You know, I'm very spiritual, are you? And it's really, there's a quite a good book from Chogyam Trungpa called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which he talks a lot about this, and this happens a lot. And so therefore I think, one, it's important to study a sort of a valid tradition, something that has a long history of proven results. If we go into some tradition that someone sort of invented, he may be some brilliant person who had some insights and so forth and is presenting something very useful, but I think we need to be very, very sceptical and cautious and investigate. But if we sort of go to traditions that have been around for hundreds or thousands of years and who have a valid traditions, then I think it's less likely that we're going to get caught up in that. And also then to really try to connect with a qualified teacher, because even if we're following a valid tradition, but we're doing it our own thing, there's still a danger that our sort of ego sort of grabs hold of that and makes it its own. And then we sort of end up, you know, and I see this in India, you know, people come to India and do the sort of the Hindu or the Buddhist thing, and then you see them walking around, shave their head and wearing all this funky clothing and sort of Buddhist or Hindu paraphernalia and jewelry and stuff, walking around and going, Om, 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 I'm so spiritual. And, you know, okay, I mean, maybe that's better than going around and hurting people, but I think if we find a valid tradition and really within that some qualified teachers, they can really help us to sort of stay on the true path.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
You'll probably cover this on day 9. So I know that off the bat. But for the notion of interconnectedness, I'm surprised at how much time we spend alone. Just for something that, because for me, interconnectedness, particularly with people, there's so much material in engaging with others. So why is this such a solitary and endlessly solitary practice in order to find that interconnectedness? Because for me, knowing interconnectedness, we have a great, you know, have lunch with someone to understand how interconnected you all are.
Absolutely. The reality is, of course, is that it's our mind that perceives all this, and now this assertion is, the Buddhist assertion is that our mind is contaminated and we're seeing reality in a distorted way. And the Buddhist assertion is that everything's interconnected. And of course, therefore, we can go out and connect with people, and that's good, and that's a lot of compassion work. But that itself is not going to cut that distorted view. I mean, it'll be helpful to connect and be compassionate, and that's an actually essential part of the practice. You know, that's the compassion wing of the practice. You know, compassion is not just about meditating; it's about going out there and helping people. You know? But that can only take us so far, because of our distorted view is what's causing all of our mental afflictions and suffering and so forth. So we need to cut that. And to cut that, we need to come to an insight into reality. And the only way we can do that is in meditation, direct insight. I mean, we can have a little taste of it, even walking in nature and so forth, this sort of oneness experience, good. But it's hard to get more than that. We'll get stuck. So we really need to do the Shamatha and Vipassana practice to start to cut. But then, of course, and then we'll have a clear perspective of others in the world. And actually, now, of course, we go out and we try to be kind and compassionate, and it's hard work, and we get angry and jealous and so forth. But if we can, through Shamatha Vipassana practice, we can start to cut this distorted view, what you will find is then the natural expression of that is loving kindness and compassion. And the natural expression is we see everything as interdependent. It's not like we have to put effort. So the answer, short answer is that yes, now we need to go out and connect and so forth, but at the same time we need to do this. We need to internalize, we need to come through the Shamatha Vipassana to cut the distorted view of reality. We need to do these two things together. This is what's called the wisdom-compassion wings of practice.
Doesn't that just reinforce your sense of self, though? If you're spending, I mean, there's a part of me that feels like this is,
But remember, there is a person here. You know, we're not trying to cut the person. You exist, I exist, everyone exists. If you didn't exist, you couldn't question that. It's a matter of coming to a correct perception of how we exist. And that's why, actually, you're right, if we don't do the compassion practice together with the internal work, there is a danger that we become very self-absorbed, and then get very disconnected from the world. That's why we need that compassion practice to keep us doing this practice in a good direction, in a healthy way. Otherwise, this can't happen.